What lurks in the static an officer's unseen battle? They train you for riots, for hostage situations, for the worst humanity can throw at you, but no academy prepares you for the static that bleeds into your patrol car, whispering secrets the dispatch logs will never record. This ISNT just knows it's a signal, and if you don't listen, it will break you before it breaks the city. The precinct buzzed with its usual late-night energy, a low hum of activity that Officer Anya Sharma had come to associate with the ebb and flow of the city's pulse. She'd been off duty for a stretch, a necessary pause to recalibrate after a case that had burrowed under her skin. Now, the familiar scent of stale coffee and disinfectant greeted her like an old, if slightly weary, friend. Her designated patrol unit, Unit 7B, sat gleaming under the fluorescent lights of the motor pool, a reassuringly solid presence. It was a standard-issue Ford Explorer, reliable and unremarkable, just the way she liked it. She ran a gloved hand over its cool surface, a silent acknowledgement of the long hours ahead. Slipping into the driver's seat, Anya initiated her pre-shift checks. The engine turned over with a healthy growl, and the dashboard lights flickered to life. She engaged the radio, the familiar crackle of the dispatch channel a comforting prelude to the night. Sergeant Meller's voice, a gravelly rumble, filled the car, assigning routine patrols, the usual string of calls about noise complaints and minor disturbances. Anya noted them down on her digital pad, her movements economical, honed by years of procedure. She powered down the main communication system, a habit ingrained from countless shifts, preferring to rely on her personal mobile for non-critical communications. Yet, as the engine settled into an idle, a faint, almost imperceptible hiss began to bleed through the speakers. It wasn't the normal static of a channel settling, nor the ghost of a distant signal. This was something different. It felt thick, insistent, like a fly trapped behind glass. Anya tapped the console, then cycled the radio power off and back on. The hiss persisted, a low-frequency thrumming that seemed to vibrate not just in her ears, but in her very bones. She leaned closer, straining to discern a pattern, a discernible word, anything that might offer a clue. There was nothing but the persistent, unnerving drone. She checked the unit's diagnostic log via the dashboard interface, all systems nominal. No audio anomalies flagged. It was as if the car itself was generating this sound, independent of any active signal. Anya tried to dismiss it. She'd been through enough to know that fatigue could play tricks on the senses, that the mind, when under strain, could conjure phantom disturbances. But this felt too tangible, too present. She keyed the mic. Dispatch, 7B. Is there any maintenance schedule for Unit 7B's comms system? Sergeant Meller's voice, slightly distorted by the intermittent hiss now audible on his end, replied, negative, Anya. 7B's clear. Everything S green. You picking up something? Just a bit of interference, she hedged, not wanting to sound unprofessional, not yet. She knew Miller's tolerance for what he deemed oddball theories. Thought I heard something. I'll run a full diagnostic on the unit once I'm out on patrol. Copy that, 7B. Stay sharp out there. She ended the transmission, the hiss returning with a vengeance now that the ambient chatter had ceased. It seemed to amplify in the sudden quiet, growing in intensity, pushing at the edges of her perception. She could almost feel it pressing against her eardrums, a tangible pressure. Anya opened the passenger door and stepped out, walking a slow circuit around the vehicle. The sound was undeniably emanating from within the car. When she stood directly beside the open driver's door, the hiss seemed to surge, as if acknowledging her proximity. It was a chilling sensation, a feeling of being observed by something inanimate, something that shouldn't possess awareness. Back inside, she powered down the main engine, leaving only the auxiliary power to the dashboard and its systems. The hiss remained, a constant, unwelcome companion. It wasn't just a sound anymore, it was a presence, an alien intrusion into the familiar confines of her patrol car. She activated her personal dashcam, its small red light a solitary point of defiance against the encroaching strangeness. She decided to take the less traveled routes for her initial sweep, a calculated deviation from her standard sector patrol. If this was just her mind playing tricks, the solitude would be better than potentially alarming a civilian or creating a false alarm. But if it was something else, something real, well, that was what she was paid to investigate. The static hummed, a low, resonant frequency that promised a night far from ordinary. The hum from Unit 7B's non-operational radio had deepened, no longer just a hiss but a complex tapestry of subtle, fractured sounds. Anya found herself straining to isolate individual components, her trained ear attempting to categorize what defied classification. It was like listening to a dozen garbled conversations simultaneously, none coherent, yet all unnervingly present. She tried to maintain her patrol, weaving through the quiet suburban streets, the streetlights casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe with the radio's insidious noise. Then, the whispers began. Faint, like thoughts just beyond reach, they brushed against her consciousness. Fragments of words, distorted and alien, would surface and then dissolve, leaving behind only a residue of unease. They were not in any language she recognized, yet a primal part of her brain felt a sickening sense of recognition. She touched the radio console, half expecting it to feel warm or to vibrate. It remained cool, inert, a silent architect of her growing disorientation. She pulled over a sedan for a routine traffic stop. The driver, a young man with nervous eyes, fumbled for his license and registration. As Anya approached the vehicle, the whispers intensified, coalescing into a distinct, sibilant voice that seemed to coil directly into her ear. They watched the gaps the fear she flinched, her hand instinctively going to her holster. The driver, startled by her sudden movement, jolted. His foot slipped from the brake pedal. The sedan lurched forward, tires squealing as it rolled directly towards a parked car. Anya reacted purely on instinct, a surge of adrenaline overriding the sonic assault. She shoved the driver's door open with a sharp crack and wrestled the steering wheel, her movements a blur of practiced force. The vehicles narrowly avoided a collision, stopping inches apart with a groan of stressed metal. The driver sat frozen, wide-eyed. Anya, heart hammering against her ribs, took a shaky breath. "Sir, you need to be more aware of your surroundings," she stated, her voice a little rougher than usual. Her focus, however, was fractured. The whispers were still there, a maddening chorus now, mocking her momentary lapse. They seemed to be drawing power from her stress, feeding on the near catastrophe. She completed the stop, issuing a warning for the equipment violation that had been her original reason for pulling him over, her mind racing. She conducted her usual checks, her voice steady, but her internal landscape was a storm of auditory chaos. Back in Unit 7B, the silence of the car was more oppressive than the noise. The whispers had receded, but the memory of their unnerving clarity lingered. She replayed the traffic stop in her mind, dissecting her actions. The distraction had been profound, a genuine impediment to her duty. She ran a hand over her face, the fatigue of the night suddenly weighing her down. Was this stress? The residue of the last case? Or was the static something more, a tangible disruption that could compromise her ability to protect? She checked her personal mobile. No missed calls, no alerts. The official channels remained silent. This was a battle fought on a frequency no one else could tune into, and for the first time, Anya felt a chilling isolation creeping in. The concern wasn't just about her focus anymore, it was about whether she was losing her grip on reality itself. The intermittent static in Unit 7B had become a constant companion, a low-grade irritant that Anya tried to compartmentalize, to push to the periphery of her awareness. She was nearing the halfway point of her shift, the city spread out before her, a grid of slumbering streets and distant, flickering lights. Her digital log was nearly empty, a testament to the quiet night. It was during a pause, while parked at a quiet overlook, that the radio crackled to life, not with the usual rhythmic cadence of Sergeant Miller's voice, but with a distorted, urgent burst. The transmission was barely decipherable, a jumble of keywords and corrupted audio. Anya strained to piece it together, her officeress instinct overriding her weariness. 911 Industrial Zone unauthorized entry. Old Sterling Mills hostels confirmed. The voice sounded strained, like someone speaking through clenched teeth, and then there was a sharp burst of what sounded like static feedback, followed by silence. It was not the crisp, procedural tone of official dispatch. It was rougher, laced with an almost panicked edge, and the address, the Sterling Mills complex, was a derelict collection of decaying buildings on the far eastern edge of her sector. It was a place usually avoided, a known haunt for vagrants and petty criminals, but hardly a hotspot for confirmed hostiles. Anya's training screamed at her to verify. The distortion, the urgency, the vague details, it all felt off. She reached for her secondary comms device, intending to call Sergeant Miller for clarification. But before she could dial, a different fragment of the transmission snagged her attention, a phrase that cut through the garble like a shard of glass beyond your understanding. It was delivered with a chilling finality, a tone that resonated with the disquieting whispers from earlier. Doubt warred with a primal sense of duty. The static in the car seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat, a rhythmic thrum that felt almost encouraging, urging her forward. The words, "beyond your understanding," echoed the inexplicable nature of her current auditory torment. If the dispatch was a fabrication, it was a cruel one. But if it held even a sliver of truth, and if those hostiles were truly a threat, then her immediate intervention could be critical. The Sterling Mills complex was miles away, and any other unit would take too long to respond. Against her ingrained caution, against the logical voice screening for verification, Anya engaged the engine of Unit 7B. The familiar rumble felt less reassuring now, more like a prelude to the unknown. She keyed her primary comms, her voice measured, betraying none of the internal conflict. Dispatch, 7B. I am responding to a 911 call regarding unauthorized entry with confirmed hostiles at the old Sterling Mills. ETA 5 mics. The silence from dispatch was unnerving. No confirmation, no acknowledgement, just the steady, oppressive hum of the static in her car. She drove with a renewed sense of urgency, the abandoned industrial complex looming in the distance like a skeletal silhouette against the night sky. As she neared the perimeter fence, the static in the car surged, almost painfully loud. She switched off the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the unnerving feeling that she had just stepped into a trap, or worse, a place where the rules of engagement had been fundamentally rewritten. The complex was a labyrinth of shadow and decay, and the only sound that cut through the night was the persistent, unidentifiable drone emanating from her own patrol vehicle. Officer Ben Chen had always pegged Anya Sharma as grounded, methodical. Had seen her work through some rough calls, always with a level head and a sharp eye. So, when he caught her on the morning after the Sterling Mills incident, meticulously wiping down Unit 7B with a meticulousness that bordered on obsessive, he found himself pausing. Chi-Han-T responded to his initial greeting, her focus entirely on the vehicle's exterior, as if trying to scrub away an invisible stain. "Everything all right, Anya?" Head asked, leaning against the doorframe of the patrol bay, a half-eaten donut in his hand. Shed jumped, a small, uncharacteristic movement, and then offered a tight, strained smile. "Just cleaning up." "Long night." Her eyes, usually direct and steady, darted past him, toward the empty expanse of the bay. "Heard you rolled out to Sterling Mills on an unofficial tip," Chen continued, his tone casual, but his observational circuits were already humming. Had been on duty when the non-response from dispatch to her call had been noted, a tiny anomaly in the system logs that had pricked his curiosity. "Everything clear?" Anya hesitated, her gaze finally meeting his. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, desperation, maybe, or a plea for understanding. "It was quiet, Ben. Too quiet." She paused, then lowered her voice, as if the air itself might be listening. "The static, Ben. It was coming from the car. Worse than before." Chen took a slow bite of his donut, the sweetness doing little to cut through the sudden strangeness of the conversation. Anya Sharma, one of the most unflustered officers on the force, talking about radio static as if it were a sentient entity. Had heard whispers from other officers about her performance on that shift, veiled comments about distraction, about being off. Had dismissed them, attributing it to the stress of returning from leave. But standing here, seeing the genuine unease etched on her face, he couldn't entirely dismiss it. "Static?" he prompted gently. "Like interference?" "More than interference," Anya said, her voice barely a whisper. She gestured vaguely towards the driver's side of 7B. "It talks. Or it tries to. It makes things happen." She seemed to be choosing her words with extreme care, as if afraid of giving them too much weight. Chen decided to humor her, or perhaps, his own ingrained curiosity got the better of him. "Mind if I take a look? Maybe give you a second pair of ears?" He didn't believe in ghosts in the machine, but he believed in thoroughness. and Anya's usual professionalism was clearly shaken. They approached Unit 7B together. Anya slid into the driver's seat, and Chen took the passenger side. She powered up the auxiliary systems, and as the dashboard lights flickered on, it began. The low, pervasive hum. This time, it felt stronger, more resonant, even to Chen, who had never experienced it before. Had always considered himself immune to suggestion, a man of facts and observable phenomena. Yet, as he sat there, the faint, undulating drone seemed to press in on him, a subtle, disorienting pressure. Then, Anya's eyes widened, her gaze fixed on something beyond the windshield. "There," she breathed. "Did you see that?" Chen followed her gaze. The late morning sun glinted off the polished surfaces of the patrol bay, creating a shifting, almost hypnotic play of light. He saw nothing out of the ordinary, just the usual reflections. "See what?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. The light," Anya stammered, her voice tight with an unfamiliar fear. It pulsed. Just for a second, like a heartbeat. Chen watched the light again. It was still, steady. But as he looked, a peculiar thing happened. For a fleeting instant, as his gaze settled on a specific point on the car's fender, the reflected light seemed to warp, to shimmer with an unnatural intensity before snapping back to normal. It was so brief, so subtle, that he almost dismissed it as a trick of the eye, a reflection of his own fatigue. But the feeling that accompanied it, a faint prickle on his skin, a momentary disorientation, was undeniable. He looked at Anya, and saw her rigid posture, her tightly clenched jaw. He hadn't imagined it, not entirely. And for the first time, the skepticism he held onto so tightly began to erode, replaced by a nascent, uncomfortable curiosity. Captain Eva Rostova's office was a study in ordered authority. The polished mahogany desk, the framed commendations, the stern, unwavering gaze of the woman herself, it all exuded an aura of control that Anya had always respected, and at times, found a little intimidating. Today, however, that aura felt like a barrier. Anya sat across from her, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, a detailed incident report glowing on her tablet. "So, Officer Sharma," Captain Rostova began, her voice clipped and businesslike, "you're claiming that a garbled dispatch led you to Sterling Mills, a derelict property, where you encountered what, exactly?" She gestured to the report. "Unauthorized entry with confirmed hostiles, yet you filed no formal report at the time, nor requested backup. And then there's this." She tapped the screen, her finger hovering over a section describing the persistent static. "And the spectral light pulses." Anya took a deep breath. "Captain, the dispatch was distorted, I admit. But the voice, it sounded urgent. And the phrase, 'beyond your understanding,' it stuck with me. The static in the vehicle, it's been a consistent issue since my return. It affects my perception. And at Sterling Mills, the presence felt tangible. The static was louder than ever." She hesitated, then added, "Officer Chen also observed an anomaly. A light distortion, a shimmer." Captain Rostova steepled her fingers, her expression unreadable. Officer Chen corroborated a light distortion? Or did he simply observe the normal reflections of a late-night shift in a derelict building? She leaned forward. "Anya, you've had a difficult few weeks. The Petrov case was brutal. It's understandable that you might be experiencing residual stress. Hallucinations, Officer Sharma, are a known symptom." Anya's jaw tightened. "Captain, I am not hallucinating. This is real. The static is real, and the potential for whatever is causing it to impact operational effectiveness is a direct threat to officer safety and public order." She pushed her tablet forward. "I've compiled all available data. The initial phantom dispatch, the subsequent lack of official record for it, my personal logs of the static's behavior, and now, preliminary data from the city's power grid monitoring system." Captain Rostova raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise crossing her face as she scrolled through the provided data. "What is this?" "It's a log of localized energy fluctuations," Anya explained. "There was a significant unexplained power surge recorded at the precise coordinates of the Sterling Mills complex during the estimated time of my arrival. It wasn't a system malfunction, it was a directed surge, brief but powerful. It correlates with my observations. The static intensified dramatically at that moment. The captain's gaze sharpened. She picked up her own terminal, tapping commands with practiced speed. A moment later, she let out a low, almost inaudible sound of acknowledgement. Her expression shifted, the dismissive certainty replaced by a grudging, analytical focus. A power surge? At Sterling Mills? That's not on any maintenance log. No registered activity in that sector. She looked at Anya, her eyes holding a new, cautious assessment. This changes the context, Sharma. While I still believe your experiences may be amplified by stress, an unexplained energy spike at a derelict industrial site during your investigation warrants further examination. Your report is noted. Well, run a full technical sweep of Unit 7B. And well, look into this power surge. The dismissal was still there, but it was now overlaid with a layer of professional obligation. The anomaly, at least, could not be entirely ignored. The stale air of Ben Chen's garage was thick with the scent of motor oil and ambition. After Captain Lostova's grudging acknowledgement, a sliver of official interest had been granted, primarily to placate Anya. The assigned technical sweep of Unit 7B had yielded nothing concrete, no faulty wiring, no aftermarket audio devices, nothing to explain the anomalous surge or the phantom static. But Anya's conviction, bolstered by Ben's shared moment of disorientation, had spurred them to pursue the matter off the books. Ben, an electronics enthusiast in his off hours, had commandeered his workbench. Shelves overflowed with oscilloscopes, signal generators, and an array of audio analysis software. Anya, her tablet still humming with the power grid data, leaned over the workbench, her brow furrowed in concentration. They had managed to isolate a short audio loop from Anya's dashcam footage of the Sterling Mills incident, a 30-second segment where the static had reached a near unbearable intensity. Okay, let's try isolating the frequencies, Ben said, his fingers flying across a keyboard. If it's a signal, ITLL have a signature, even if it's scrambled. He initiated a spectral analysis, a complex waterfall of colored lines appearing on the screen, representing the audio spectrum. The static, when isolated, was a broad, chaotic smear, but within it, Ben pointed to subtle variations. See this? This ISNT random noise. There's a regularity here, almost like a carrier wave, but it's buried under a lot of interference. Anya zoomed in on a section of the data. It's not just noise, Ben. It's structured. Listen. She played the isolated segment through a pair of high-fidelity headphones, passing them to him. Ben donned them, and for a moment, his expression went blank, his eyes unfocused. The familiar skeptical curiosity had been replaced by a dawning comprehension, then a hint of apprehension. It sounds like he trailed off, shaking his head. Like there are voices in there. Fragmented, distorted. But they're definitely not just random pops and crackles. He removed the headphones, his face pale. And they react. When we run these analyses, when we try to clean up the signal, the pattern shifts. It's like it knows we're listening. Anya felt a chill crawl up her spine. This was exactly what she'd been sensing, the feeling of being observed, of the phenomenon responding to her investigation. The dispatch mentioned beyond your understanding, she murmured, recalling the disquieting phrase from the Sterling Mills incident. And the power surge. It's not random. It's targeted. Ben started manipulating the audio filters, attempting to deconstruct the layers of distortion. Hours bled into the night. They identified recurring sonic motifs, rhythmic pulses that seemed to punctuate the fragmented vocalizations. It wasn't a language in any conventional sense, not built on phonemes and syntax, but it possessed a discernible structure, a form of communication that eluded immediate comprehension. They began to hypothesize. Was it a deliberately masked transmission? A byproduct of an unknown technology? Or something else entirely? Look at this, Ben said, pointing to a section of the waveform that displayed a series of sharp, almost crystalline peaks. These spikes, they're not acoustic. They're almost informational. Like data packets. And they align with the times Anya experienced the visual distortions. He zoomed out, displaying the entire spectral analysis. The static isn't just noise trying to sound like something. It is something. It's a complex signal, and whatever's broadcasting it, it's aware of us trying to decode it. The implication hung heavy in the air. This wasn't a natural phenomenon, nor a simple malfunction. It was a deliberate, intelligent interference, and their probing was only making it more active. The hum was no longer confined to the patrol car. It had seeped into Anya's consciousness, a constant, thrumming resonance that seemed to emanate from the very air around them. Ben, his initial skepticism now replaced by a grim resolve, had been poring over Anya's dashcam footage again. Had isolated a subtle, recurring visual distortion that appeared whenever the static reached its peak intensity, a momentary warping of the visual field, a flicker at the periphery of perception. It's not just auditory anymore, Anya, Ben stated, his voice low. He pointed to a specific timestamp on the video. Look here. The light from that street lamp. It bends. For a fraction of a second, it's not right. And it's happening more often. He cross-referenced this with the power grid data Anya had found. The anomalies, the surges, the visual distortions, they all seemed to converge, not at Sterling Mills anymore, but at a different, older nexus. A map of the city lay spread between them on the workbench. Ben's finger traced a line from the Sterling Mills complex, across the sprawling suburbs, and settled on a point on the far northern edge. The old communications tower, he said, his voice barely a whisper. The decommissioned one they used for early radio broadcasts. It's ancient, been out of service for decades. The static, which had been a low murmur in the garage, suddenly surged, a distinct, almost excited pulse that made both of them jump. Anya fumbled for her tablet, her heart pounding. The city's power grid data, which they had been monitoring passively, flared with a massive, localized spike centered directly on that point. It's telling us to go there, Anya breathed, the static in her own mind seeming to synchronize with the external phenomenon. It was a chilling realization, a directed guidance from the very thing that was tormenting her. The idea of investigating a derelict structure, alone with Ben and this growing, inexplicable force, was a proposition that defied every protocol. Yet, the memory of the whispers, the unnerving message of being beyond understanding, and the now undeniable evidence of a directed signal, left them with no other recourse. To ignore it would be to abdicate their duty. They drove in Anya's personal vehicle, a nondescript sedan that wouldn't draw immediate attention. As they approached the outer perimeter of the city, the familiar urban glow gave way to a more profound darkness. The landscape grew sparse, dotted with skeletal trees and the occasional abandoned farmstead. The radio in Anya's car, though functional, remained silent, utterly overridden by the invasive hum that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. It felt like they were driving into the eye of a storm. The radio tower loomed against the bruised twilight sky, a skeletal behemoth of rust and decay. Its silhouette was stark, a monument to a forgotten era of communication. As they drove closer, the air itself seemed to thicken. The static in their minds intensified, no longer just a sound but a palpable pressure, a distortion of reality that made the edges of their vision waver. Then pointed to the sky. Anya, look. Above the tower, the stars seemed to shimmer and distort, as if viewed through rippling water. The familiar constellations were subtly shifted, their patterns broken. Then, faint, ephemeral lights began to manifest, dancing around the tower's massive structure, not the steady glow of power lines, but flickering, iridescent motes that pulsed with an unnatural rhythm. The visual anomalies they had experienced separately, Anya's perceived light pulse and Ben's warped reflections, were now manifesting on a grand scale. A low thrumming, distinct from the internal static, began to emanate from the tower itself, a deep, resonant vibration that shook the ground beneath their feet. This was no mere malfunction, it was a beacon, a focal point, and the evidence was no longer just auditory or suggestive. It was stark, visual, and utterly, terrifyingly real. The air around the abandoned radio tower crackled with an energy that defied natural explanation. The hum Anya and Ben had become accustomed to had escalated into a resonant thrum, a physical vibration that seemed to warp the very space they occupied. The iridescent lights, once fleeting, now coalesced into swirling patterns of impossible color, painting the decaying metal structure in hues that no spectrum should contain. Ben, his face grim, held up a portable EMF meter. The needle was pegged, vibrating wildly, far beyond any readings had ever encountered. It's a field," Ben stammered, his voice strained against the overwhelming sensory input. "It's not just broadcasting. It's projecting. Affecting everything around it." Anya felt it too, a disorienting pressure in her skull, a mental fog that threatened to swallow her thoughts. The whispers, once fragmented, now seemed to surge, forming coherent, if alien, phrases that clawed at the edges of her mind. "Submission, the great silence you cannot resist." Anya gripped her service weapon, the familiar way, the small comfort in the face of this encroaching unknown. Her training, years of drilled-in procedures, felt both inadequate and, ironically, essential. She focused on Ben, on the methodical way he was still trying to analyze the phenomenon, even as it assaulted them. "Ben, the signal. You said it reacts when we try to decode it. If it's intelligent, it's also trying to defend itself. How do we disrupt it?" Ben fumbled with a device head jury-rigged from salvaged parts in his garage, a broad-spectrum signal jammer, intended for disrupting unauthorized broadcasts, but never tested against anything like this. "I don't know if this will work," he admitted, his voice tight. "It's designed for terrestrial frequencies. This feels like it's operating on a different plane entirely." He activated it, and a high-pitched whine cut through the cacophony, briefly pushing back the pervasive hum. The swirling lights flickered, momentarily losing their intensity. "It's working," Anya explained, a sliver of hope cutting through the despair. "Keep it going." But the entity, or whatever it was not passive. The visual distortions intensified, not just in the sky, but around them, within the very air. Shapes seemed to form and dissipate in their peripheral vision, fleeting impressions of impossibilities. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, attempting to burrow into their minds, to sow discord and doubt. Anya felt a wave of profound despair wash over her, a feeling of utter insignificance, of futility. It was an emotional assault, designed to break their will, to incapacitate them. "It's trying to overwhelm us," Anya forced out, her voice a ragged gasp. She focused on her duty, on the faces of the people she swore to protect, on the oath she had taken. "We have to anchor ourselves. Procedural. Think procedurally. What's our objective?" Then, eyes narrowed in fierce concentration, adjusted the jammer. "Disrupt the source. Prevent it from spreading. If we can overload it, maybe." Anya nodded, her mind racing. The tower. It was the conduit, the focal point. If they could disrupt the tower's function, perhaps they could sever the connection, or at least destabilize the field. She remembered the initial dispatch, the mention of hostiles, the garbled warnings. This wasn't just a broadcast, it was an invasion, a silent siege on the human mind. "Ben, I need you to keep that jammer running, focused on the tower," Anya commanded, her voice staining a steelier edge. "I'm going to try and reach the primary transmission array. If I can introduce a feedback loop." It was a desperate gamble, a lone officer attempting to disable a threat that defied all known laws of physics, armed with little more than salvaged tech and a stubborn sense of duty. The static roared, a primal scream of defiance, as Anya began to ascend the decaying metal structure, the swirling lights and disorienting whispers a terrifying escort. The fate of the city, she knew, rested on her ability to fight a war in the unseen frequencies, a battle against an enemy that existed only in the static. Duty doesn't end when the sirens stop. Sometimes, the most critical battles are fought in the silence, in the spaces between understanding, where the echoes of what we protect resonate most profoundly. Anya and Ben faced the unseen, not for glory, but because the quiet hum of ordinary life depended on it. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the unseen. What do you believe Anya and Ben truly silenced at the tower, and what lingering echoes might remain? Share your thoughts on Dusty Whisper. Until next time, stay vigilant. But what happens when the static returns, not from a forgotten tower, but from the very devices we trust?